The smell of vomit and salt water filled the darkness below deck. Sergeant Takeshi Hayashi sat with his back against the cold steel wall, feeling the American transport ship roll beneath him. 46 other Japanese prisoners surrounded him in the cramped hold. Most had stopped talking days ago. Some prayed silently. Others stared at nothing, already ghosts in their own bodies. 3 weeks earlier, Hayashi had been fighting on Saipan. He remembered the final American assault, thousands of Marines pouring onto the beaches while naval guns turned the jungle into fire. His unit of 80 men fought for 11 days. When the ammunition ran out, they fixed bayonets. When the bayonets broke, they used rocks and fists. Only 9 survived to be captured. Hayashi had taken a bullet through his left shoulder and shrapnel across his back. He woke up in an American field hospital, convinced he was already dead, but the Americans did not kill him. They cleaned his wounds. They gave him water. They fed him rice and canned meat. This confused Hayashi more than any battlefield terror. His officers had promised that Americans tortured prisoners. They said the enemy cut off fingers and burned men alive. The Imperial Army showed photographs and testimonies. Every soldier knew what capture meant: shame, agony, and a slow death. Instead, Hayashi received medicine and a blanket. Now, as the ship carried him toward California, he tried to make sense of this. Corporal Kenji Endo sat beside him, whispering theories. Endo was from Nagoya, a factory worker's son who volunteered at 19. He still believed everything the army taught them. "They are fattening us for propaganda," Endo said. "They will parade us through their cities like animals. Then they will execute us on camera to frighten our people." Hayashi nodded, but doubt crawled through his mind like insects. During basic training in Osaka, his instructors spent hours explaining American weakness. They showed newsreels of empty factories, lazy workers, and crumbling cities. The United States was a nation of soft, selfish individuals who cared only about pleasure. Their women worked in offices instead of homes. Their men danced in nightclubs instead of training for war. Japan had discipline, honor, and divine purpose. America had nothing but noise and corruption. 1 Japanese soldier equals 10 Americans, his sergeant had shouted. Their machines are made of garbage. Their spirits are made of paper. We will crush them like insects beneath our boots. Hayashi believed every word. He had to. His father served in China, his grandfather in Russia. The Hayashi family bled for the emperor across 3 generations. To doubt was to betray them all. The transport ship docked in San Francisco on a gray October morning in 1944. Guards led the prisoners up steel stairs into blinding daylight. Hayashi squinted against the sun, his legs weak from weeks without walking. What he saw made him stop breathing. The harbor stretched endlessly in every direction. Ships filled the water, destroyers, cargo vessels, troop transports, tankers. Hayashi tried to count them and lost track after 60. Cranes swung through the air, loading and unloading with mechanical precision. Trucks flowed along the docks like rivers of steel. The noise was deafening: engines, horns, shouting workers, clanging metal. This was not the dying empire his officers described. Endo grabbed his arm. "It is a trick," he hissed. "They brought every ship they owned to one place. To impress us. To break our spirits." Hayashi wanted to believe this. He needed to believe this. The prisoners were loaded onto buses and driven through the city. Hayashi pressed his face to the window like a child. The streets were clean. The buildings stood tall and undamaged. Automobiles crowded every road, more cars than he had seen in his entire life. Women walked freely in bright clothing, carrying shopping bags and pushing baby carriages. Children played in parks without fear. No bombed ruins. No starving crowds. No signs of a nation losing a war. At the processing facility, American officers photographed each prisoner and recorded their names. The paperwork moved quickly. The guards were firm but not cruel. One even offered Hayashi a cigarette, which he refused out of confused pride. That night, lying on a cot in a barracks that smelled of fresh paint, Hayashi stared at the ceiling. His shoulder throbbed. His mind raced. Everything he knew, everything he believed, suddenly felt like sand shifting beneath his feet. Tomorrow, they said, he would be transferred to a work camp in the Midwest. He would see American factories up close. He would witness the enemy's industrial heart. Endo whispered from the next cot. Stay strong, brother. Japan will win. Our carriers will come. Our armies will rescue us. This nightmare will end. Hayashi closed his eyes and said nothing. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he was afraid to examine, a single question had taken root. A question that would grow with every passing day, every new sight, every impossible truth. What if everything they told us was a lie? The train screamed through frozen cornfields as winter light painted the Midwest gray. Hayashi watched America pass his window for 3 days, endless farmland, small towns, rivers wider than any he had seen in Japan. The country seemed to have no end. His instructors never mentioned this. They spoke of America as a small, crowded nation clinging to its coasts. They never described a land so vast that a man could travel for days and still not reach its center. The factory appeared on the horizon like a metal mountain. Hayashi pressed his forehead against the cold glass and forgot to breathe. The Willow Run bomber plant outside Detroit stretched nearly a mile long. Smokestacks rose against the winter sky, pumping white clouds into the air. Railroad tracks fed into the complex from every direction, carrying steel, aluminum, rubber, and 1,000 other materials. The building itself seemed alive, humming with power that Hayashi could feel through the train's floor. Impossible, Endo whispered beside him. This cannot be real. But it was real. And it was only the beginning. Guards escorted the 13 Japanese prisoners through security checkpoints and into the factory's heart. The noise hit Hayashi like a physical blow, hammering, welding, drilling, engines, conveyor belts, shouting voices, all blending into a roar that shook his chest. The smell of oil, hot metal, and sweat filled his lungs. Heat radiated from machines that towered 3 stories high. An American officer explained through a translator that the prisoners would perform basic labor, moving crates, cleaning floors, sorting parts. They would not touch aircraft or sensitive equipment. They would work 12-hour shifts alongside civilian workers. Any trouble meant solitary confinement. Hayashi barely heard the words. His eyes could not stop moving. The assembly line stretched the entire length of the building, a quarter-mile of organized chaos. Workers stood at stations like soldiers at posts, each performing one task with mechanical precision. Parts flowed from station to station on conveyor belts. Engines arrived from one direction, wings from another, fuselages from a third. Everything converged toward the end of the line, where completed bombers emerged like newborn giants. 24 Liberators. 4-engine heavy bombers capable of carrying 8,000 pounds of explosives across 4,000 miles. The same aircraft that had been pounding Japanese positions across the Pacific. The same aircraft that would soon burn Tokyo. Hayashi began counting. He could not help himself. In the first hour, he watched 3 completed bombers roll off the line. In the second hour, 3 more. The factory operated around the clock, 3 shifts of workers rotating endlessly. Night shift, day shift, swing shift. The machines never stopped. The conveyor belts never paused. The war never slept. He did the mathematics in his head. If this single factory produced 1 bomber every 27 minutes, that meant roughly 50 bombers per day. Over 1,000 per month. And this was only one factory. His officers told him that America struggled to build aircraft. They said American workers were lazy and undisciplined. They promised that Japanese quality and Japanese spirit would overcome any numerical disadvantage, but these bombers were not garbage. Hayashi watched quality inspectors examine every rivet, every weld, every wire. He saw rejected parts thrown into bins and replaced. He witnessed a precision and discipline that matched anything he had seen in Japan, and he had worked in a Mitsubishi factory before the war. The civilian workers shocked him most. Women operated heavy presses and welding torches. Black men worked alongside white men on the same assembly line. Old men with gray hair carried heavy loads beside teenage boys. They wore bandanas over their hair and grease on their clothes. They laughed, argued, and shouted jokes across the factory floor. Some wore buttons that said, "Remember Pearl Harbor," and glared at the prisoners with hatred. Others barely glanced at them, too focused on their work. During a meal break, an older worker approached Hayashi's group. He was perhaps 60 years old, with calloused hands and tired eyes. A photograph was pinned to his chest, a young man in a Marine uniform, smiling. "My son," the worker said, pointing at the picture. Then he pointed toward the west. "Died. Tarawa. Hayashi knew Tarawa. November 1943. 1,000 American Marines died in 76 hours. His countrymen killed them. Men just like this worker's son that he expected rage. He prepared for violence. Instead, the old man just shook his head slowly. "Hell of a thing," he muttered. "Hell of a thing." Then he walked away, returning to his station. That night, Hayashi lay awake in the cold barracks, staring at the ceiling. Endo snored beside him, still clinging to denial. But Hayashi could not escape the numbers. 50 bombers a day from this factory alone. The officer mentioned there were over 30 similar plants across America. Perhaps more. His hands trembled beneath the blanket. Not from cold. From something far worse. For the first time since his capture, Takashi Hayashi understood that Japan might not win this war. Spring rain hammered the factory roof like distant artillery. Hayashi stood at his station, sorting bolts into metal bins, his hands moving automatically while his mind wandered somewhere far darker. 4 months had passed since his arrival. 4 months of watching America's industrial heart pump life into its war machine. 4 months of counting bombers, ships, tanks, and ammunition that flowed eastward and westward toward both oceans. 4 months of slowly dying inside. The radio mounted on the factory wall crackled to life. Workers paused. A newscaster's voice echoed through the massive hall, cutting through the mechanical roar. American forces had captured Iwo Jima. After 36 days of savage fighting, the island had fallen. 21,000 Japanese defenders were dead. Almost all of them. The Marines had raised an American flag on Mount Suribachi. Cheering erupted across the factory floor. Workers embraced. Some wept openly. A woman near Hayashi's station fell to her knees and pressed her hands together in prayer, whispering her son's name. Hayashi felt the bolt slip from his fingers and clatter against the floor. Iwo Jima. 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The generals called it unsinkable. They said the fortifications would hold for months. They promised that American casualties would break the enemy's will before the island fell. 21,000 men died keeping that promise, burned in tunnels, buried in caves, shredded by naval guns that fired from ships built in factories exactly like this one. Endo grabbed his shoulder. "They are lying," he hissed. "American propaganda. Iwo Jima still stands. Our brothers still fight." But Hayashi saw the truth in the workers' faces. He heard it in their voices. This was not propaganda. This was victory, real, bloody, absolute. 3 weeks later, worse news arrived. American B-29 bombers, the new superfortresses, even larger than the B-24s, had conducted a massive night raid on Tokyo. 300 aircraft dropped incendiary bombs across the city's wooden neighborhoods. 100,000 civilians burned to death in a single night. 16 square miles of the capital became ash. The firestorm created wind strong enough to throw people into the flames. Hayashi read the newspaper report 3 times, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pages. His mother lived in Tokyo, near the Sumida River. His younger sister worked at a textile factory in Honjo. Both neighborhoods appeared on the list of destroyed areas. He stumbled into the supply room during his break and collapsed against the wall. The sobs came without warning, tearing through his chest like shrapnel. Months of suppressed horror, grief, and guilt erupted from somewhere he could not control. He wept for his family. He wept for Saipan. He wept for the 21,000 ghosts of Iwo Jima. He wept for himself, for the young man who once believed in glory and now understood only slaughter. Endo found him there 20 minutes later. "Stand up," Endo commanded, his voice cold. "You shame yourself. You shame Japan." Hayashi looked at his friend through swollen eyes. "They burned Tokyo," he whispered. "My mother. My sister. Then we will burn their cities in return. The divine wind will come. The kamikaze will destroy their fleet. We will never surrender. We started this fire," Hayashi said quietly. "Nanking. Manila. Shanghai. We burned them first. Now the fire comes home." Endo struck him across the face. The blow was hard enough to snap Hayashi's head sideways and split his lip. "Traitor," Endo spat. "Coward. You sound like the enemy now. Perhaps you have become one of them." Word of the confrontation spread through the prisoner barracks like poison. The group fractured into factions. Some followed Endo, clinging to imperial pride and dreaming of rescue. Others drifted toward Hayashi's quiet despair, unable to deny what their eyes had witnessed. Arguments turned into fights. Former comrades stopped speaking. The small community that once shared cigarettes and memories now glared at each other across invisible battle lines. One evening, the old American worker found Hayashi sitting alone behind the factory, watching the sunset through chains of industrial smoke. Frank was his name. The man whose son died at Tarawa. "Rough day," Frank said, lowering himself onto a crate with a grunt. Hayashi did not answer. He did not know what to say. Frank pulled out a photograph, the same Marine from his button. "Michael," he said. Called him Mikey. 22 years old. Wanted to be a teacher after the war. History teacher. Loved reading about ancient Rome. Hayashi finally spoke. "I am sorry." "Sorry for what?" "You didn't kill him. My countrymen did." Frank nodded slowly. "And your countrymen are dying too. Whole lot of young men burning on both sides. Whole lot of mothers crying tonight." He paused, lighting a cigarette. "War's a machine, son. Eats everyone. Don't matter what flag you wave." Hayashi looked at the old man, this enemy who offered wisdom instead of hatred. "How do you keep working?" he asked. "How do you build these bombers knowing what they do?" Frank exhaled smoke and stared at the sky. "Because I want it to end. Every plane we build brings the end closer. Every bomb we drop is one less my neighbor's boy has to carry. It's ugly math. But it's the only math we got." Hayashi said nothing. But for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest felt slightly less crushing. Perhaps understanding did not require forgiveness. Perhaps survival only required truth. August 15, 1945. The factory floor fell silent for the first time in Hayashi's memory. Workers stopped their machines. Conveyor belts ground to a halt. The endless roar that had become the soundtrack of his captivity simply ceased, replaced by something more powerful, the Emperor's voice, crackling through radio speakers mounted on every wall. Hayashi stood frozen beside his station, surrounded by American workers who did not understand the words but understood their meaning. The Emperor spoke in formal court Japanese, a language even many Japanese citizens could barely follow. But the message was clear. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then a single cheer broke the silence, followed by another, and another, until the entire factory erupted. Workers embraced, wept, threw their hats into the air, and danced between idle machines. Horns blared. Factory whistles screamed. Outside, Hayashi could hear church bells ringing across Detroit that he felt nothing. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees on the concrete floor. Endo collapsed beside him, staring at nothing, his face gray and empty. The other prisoners stood scattered among celebrating Americans, islands of grief in an ocean of joy that it was over. Everything they fought for, everything they lost, everything they believed, over. Japan was defeated. The emperor himself had admitted it. The divine wind never came. The unsinkable island sank. The unbreakable empire broke. That night, Hayashi found Endo in the barracks bathroom, pressing a sharpened piece of metal against his wrist. Blood had already begun to trickle across his skin. His eyes were hollow, already dead. Bushido demands this, Endo whispered. I cannot return home in shame. I cannot face my father as a prisoner who surrendered. Hayashi moved slowly, carefully, the way one approaches a wounded animal. You did not surrender, he said. We were captured. Unconscious. Wounded. There is no shame in that. There is nothing but shame. Japan is finished. The emperor is humiliated. Our ancestors weep. Hayashi reached out and gripped Endo's wrist, gently forcing the blade down. Our ancestors also rebuilt. After every earthquake. After every fire. After every war. That is what Japanese people do. We endure. We rebuild. Dying here accomplishes nothing. Endo's resistance crumbled. The metal clattered to the floor. He collapsed against Hayashi, sobbing, the first tears Endo had allowed himself since their capture nearly a year ago. They stayed like that for a long time, two broken soldiers holding each other in an enemy bathroom, mourning a world that no longer existed. The following weeks passed in a strange blur. The factory converted from war production to peacetime manufacturing. The same assembly lines that built bombers would soon build automobiles. Workers who once glared at prisoners now occasionally nodded at them, even offered cigarettes. The hatred was fading, replaced by exhaustion and a desperate hunger for normalcy. One afternoon, Frank found Hayashi near the loading docks. The old man looked different, younger, somehow, as if the war's end had lifted years from his shoulders. He carried a small paper bag. Heard you're shipping out tomorrow, Frank said. Repatriation. They're sending you home. Home. Hayashi did not know what that word meant anymore. His letters to Tokyo had gone unanswered for months. He did not know if his mother or sister survived the firebombing. He did not know what remained of the neighborhood where he grew up. Frank opened the paper bag and removed a small object, a military dog tag, worn and scratched. Michael's name was stamped into the metal. I want you to take this, Frank said, pressing it into Hayashi's palm. Hayashi stared at the tag, confused. Why? Because you need to remember. Not just the bombs and the battles. You need to remember that a boy named Michael wanted to be a teacher. That his father worked in this factory every day hoping to end the war that killed him. That on both sides of the ocean, ordinary people suffered for decisions they never made. Frank paused, his voice thick. Build something, son. When you get home, build something. Not weapons. Not warships. Something that helps people live instead of helping them die. Hayashi boarded a transport ship 2 days later. He carried few possessions, a small bag of clothes, a notebook filled with observations from the factory, and Frank's son's dog tag hanging around his neck beneath his shirt. Endo stood beside him at the railing as California shrank behind them. What will you do? Endo asked quietly. When we return. Hayashi watched the coastline disappear, thinking about everything he had witnessed. The factories. The workers. The machine that America had built, not from cruelty, but from cooperation. People of different races, different ages, different beliefs, all working toward a single purpose. They had outproduced Japan not because they were superior beings, but because they were organized beings. Because they treated war as a problem to be solved with mathematics and efficiency rather than with spirit and sacrifice alone. Japan mocked this. Japan called it soulless. Japan believed that Bushido would triumph over assembly lines. Japan was wrong. I will build, Hayashi said finally. Factories. Machines. Systems. Whatever Japan needs to survive. He touched the dog tag beneath his shirt. And I will never believe comfortable lies again. The ship carried him toward a ruined homeland and an uncertain future. But for the first time since Saipan, Takashi Hayashi felt something he had forgotten existed: hope.